Welcome. Today we're going to be looking at connecting Prusa's MMU2 to the SKR 1.4. To do this, we will need to define the MMU2 features in Marlin and install the MMU2 on the printer and wire it to the controller board. So first we'll need to go to the how.h file, and we'll need to find the section where the serial ports are defined. They look a little different than the previous version, but we'll do the same thing. We'll copy serial port 2. We're going to paste it as serial port 3, and then we need to change where it says serial port 2 to serial port 3. My serial 1 will become my serial 2. Then we can save that. We'll go to configuration.h, and here we're going to enable the MMU2. So we'll scroll up to where we find the serial port section at the top of the file again. And we're going to take serial port 2, we're going to copy it, and that'll become our definition for serial port 3. We're going to go ahead and change the 2 to a 3 here, and then -1. And I assigned it to 3 just to kind of keep everything straight in my head. But you can assign it to 1, 2, or 3, it doesn't really matter. We just need to make sure that we are consistent between here and the configuration ADV. I also changed secondary to tertiary. Next we'll go down, like we did previously, to where the extruder count is defined, and we're going to change that to 5. Then we'll want to go and uncomment define Prusa MMU2, and then we can save that and open configuration adv.h. So we'll want to scroll to the bottom to where the MMU2 options are defined, and the first thing we need to do is correct our serial port information. So we'll need to change serial port 2 to be serial port 3 because that's what we set in the configuration file. MMU serial will become serial 3 because that's the specific serial we're using. Uncomment the defined reset pin because we're using a hardware reset pin, and we're going to do pin 0_26. That's the SPI pin that we're using for the reset. Then we'll come down to where the eject, loading, and ramming sequences are defined. Filament eject is a speed to eject the filament without ramming if you select that option from the menu. The load to nozzle sequence is from the extruder gears to the nozzle. It's based on the default Mark III extruder. Left hand column is relative extruder distances, E distances, and right hand column is speeds in millimeters per minute. And below that we have the ramming sequence, same thing, default Mark III extruder. Left side is extruder relative distances, right side is speeds. Then we can go down to where it says extruder sensor. We have 2 options. I have the first option, which is the older style extruder where it's just mounted on top of the extruder body, and there's a distance between the sensor and the gears. The other option is if your sensor is triggered at the gears. This is where if you have a little chimney adapter that came with the MMU2S. You can uncomment that one. Retry attempts for the older style set to 5 by default. That works for me. You have some other options for retract speeds, deviation, lengths, things like that for the MMU2S. The last line here is for debug output. Unless you need to get debug output for troubleshooting, just leave that commented out. Now in our pins file we have to do something that we didn't have to do before, and that is because of how they've made life a little easier for us in Marlin 2.0.7 than was in 2.0.5.3. So if we were to look at the hardware serial header file, we'll see that the UART3 is already defined for us and all the different pin configurations that are possible with it. And then if we don't use one of those 2, it defaults to pin function 2, which is our serial interface, and pins 0 and 1 on port 0, which is the one we want to use. So if we flip back to our pins file, we'll see that there's a custom flag set up for calling pin config UART3 to pin 428. So that's to make Wi-Fi implementation easier on the boards, but we don't want that one. We want to make sure it goes to function 2 and port 0, pin 0 and 1. So all we need to do is, in our pins file, comment out that line, and then since we're not setting up a declaration for that UART3, it's going to default to the pins we need. So once we're done with that, we can go ahead and save everything. Go ahead and clear out by hitting the delete button there, and that'll clear out all the library information, and then we'll go ahead and we can start compiling. It'll force everything to reload, and we will come back once the firmware has been compiled. So we've got our firmware compiled. So what we're going to do is go to your output folder location and grab the firmware.bin file. So if you just, wherever your firmware is located, go to PIO, build, LPC 1769 or 68, firmware.bin, you want to copy that and paste it into your micro SD card. And then you can just eject the card, and next it's on to the printer. So here we are at the printer. Go ahead and mount the MMU2 unit where you want it. I have mine placed on the top of the frame for now. Connect the power and data cables to their respective ports. Screw everything down. And then connect the PTFE tube to the extruder inlet. Next, go to the controller board, and we're going to connect the power and data cables. I installed a JST connector on the end of my power cable so I could take advantage of always on fan headers. So just plug that in there, and then I'm going to plug the fan back in. There we go. And then we'll want to grab the end of the data cable, and we're going to need to make some changes to the pin connections here. So first we want to remove the brown wire, which is our reset pin. You just carefully lift the tab, try not to break it. And then you want to slide the brown wire into a single DuPont housing, because this is going to go on a different pin header. And then we also need to move the remaining data cables, wires over one pin in the housing to accommodate that ground pin on the I2C header that we're not using. There's an extra white wire here that doesn't actually get used for anything, so we're just going to place it on the outside position. Also, make sure you don't swap the order of the green and the white wires. Leave the blue wire alone. That's your 5 volt. It's going to stay in that bottom position. And then we'll put the unused white wire in that top position that's not actually going to be connected to anything. So there's our I2C connector. The bottom pin is the ground. So we'll just slide that connector on, blue wire down. And then the brown wire for reset. Top right pin on the SPI header is pin 26, so we'll just connect that up. Then we'll just do a little bit of cable management to tidy things up in the case. Snip the ends off, and then we'll put our cover back on. So now the cover's on, once the cover's on, install the new micro SD card with your new firmware in the slot, and turn on power to the printer. Let's see it boot up here, and we're going to have a menu option now for MMU. So we can go in there and select load filament. I'm going to load to position 3, and we'll see the selector will start homing itself, and then the idler will rotate, and we'll start loading. And there it is. Next, we're going to preheat our nozzle for PLA, and then we're going to see if we can get the filament to load to the nozzle. So let this warm up. Then go back into our MMU menu, go to load to nozzle, select filament 3 again, and watch everything work. I had disconnected power here, which is why it's rehoming. Normally it wouldn't do this. So it's select position 3, the red light comes on, and you can watch the filament go into the PTFE tube. There it goes. And then in a few seconds you'll see it start coming out of the nozzle. There you go. So that's all there is to connecting. There's a lot of tweaking that'll need to be done afterwards, and I will possibly post videos as I go through experimenting with it. There also is worth noting that Big Tree Tech is releasing their own version of the MMU2 controller board that will use their removable drivers. So that's something interesting to keep a look at, and I'll probably end up picking one up and experimenting with it as well. It'll be running its own firmware. It's not going to use the Prusa firmware. So be interesting to see how that works out. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. If you like the video, click like, click subscribe. I hope to do more videos in the future. Thanks for watching.